Hi, this is Farshi with another video just for you. So today we're going to take a look at the issue called ghost flushing. Ghost flushing basically means that every now and again you hear the toilet, the tank, filling up on its own. And usually what the issue is that there is a flapper inside of the tank that holds the water until you're ready to flush by pushing the lever down, and the flapper will rise and allow the water to go through. So if the flapper is worn and it doesn't create a good seal, then you're going to hear the ghost flushing, which what happens is that water leaks through the rather from the tank to the toilet, and the fill valve that's inside the tank compensates for that, and every now and again you hear the tank filling up. So if the flapper doesn't resolve the issue, then the other part of the seal, which is the flush valve, needs to be replaced, and that's what we'll go through today, replacing the flush valve. The flush valve that we're using here today is a 2-inch flush valve. There are also 3-inch flush valves out there. So before going through the process of disassembling, especially if you only have one toilet, disassembling your toilet, make sure that you have the proper parts, and additionally make sure you have the proper tools. So you'll need to have an adjustable wrench, a channel lock. Typically a flat screwdriver will take care of taking off the bolts, and having a pair of gloves would be great, because the seal that's on these flush valves, it's black, and after it's been in the tank for years, it will stay in your hands. So the other thing you will need to have is a small little bucket, something to catch the water as we drain the tank. Nice to have a little sponge and have some paper towels. So we'll bring the camera closer and take a look at each step that is required in order to get to this flush valve and replace it. Here I've taken the lid off of the tank. So before we continue and drain the tank, let's take a look at the different components inside of this tank. So this is our fill valve. And this white piece over here is part of our flush valve, and this is the flapper that's underneath there. So what happens is, if the flapper is not sealing, it will have a small amount of leak. You may not even hear it right there. And if the water level gets below, there's a lot of leak here, but this is over time. So when the water level gets low enough, then our fill valve kicks in and fills the water up to the level. And this toilet's been here, I think, for over 15, 16 years. And you can tell where the line is. The water comes up to this level over here. So if you don't hear the ghost flushing, one thing you can do is mark where the water level is, shut the water off, and walk away, and come back in 2-3 hours and see if the water level has gone lower than the line. If it has, without anybody flushing it, then it tells you that there is a leak. And again, in most cases, you can just replace the flapper, and that resolves the issue. So again, the symptoms will look like something like this. We have a leak, the water level gets too low, gets low enough that kicks in our fill valve. So that's what you hear, or that's what you see. All right, so the next thing we're going to do here, we're going to continue with our process of taking that flush valve out and replace it. First thing we do is we shut the water off. water turned off. We're going to drain the valve by flushing, and since the water is turned off, we're not going to get any more water coming into the tank. See, with the water out of there, now you can see the line here. This is the line where, in this particular toilet, that's where the fill line is. So we got most of the water out, but you can see that there's still water there because there is a portion of, I'm going to leave this open so you can see it. There's a portion of our flush valve that sits above the bottom of our tank, and that's where we have some water accumulated. And that's where your sponge comes into play, unless you don't mind getting water on the floor, but I do, so I'm going to use my sponge, and this is a little time consuming, but here's that where your bucket comes into play. But if you want, you can actually drain into the toilet bowl itself. Okay, so I'm going to pause here, take all the water out, and then we'll continue from there. So now that we've taken most of the water out with our sponge, yeah, you see that black water that's down below. That is basically what I was talking about earlier, is the from the seal. That seal is so old that as soon as you touch it, it basically is falling apart, and that's what you see there. And that's where the gloves come into play. Once we start the process of taking that apart, I'll put the gloves on. So the next thing to do is, there are 2 bolts in there that we'll get a close view of it here shortly. There's one that's here, it's pretty well rusted, and there's another one underneath our flush valve, and we take those 2 off. Last thing we need to take off is, there is a hose connection that comes up to our fill valve, and that's what provides the water supply to our tank. With our valve turned off underneath, we'll go ahead and take that connection off. Then we can remove the tank. Yes, unfortunately, that's what we have to do in order to replace the flush valve. All right, so let's put this, we can also use the bucket over here to catch anything else that's left in our tank there. So what we're going to do is, the connection underneath here, where I'm disconnecting our water supply line, it should be hand tight. So it's, there we go. We just caught some more water underneath there. I think you can see it. That's black stuff coming down there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those bolts off. All right. So in order to take these bolts off, we're going to need our flat screwdriver. And this one's pretty well rusted. Oh yeah, that head of that bolt is all destroyed. And that's where our adjustable wrench comes into play. You can get underneath here and take this bolt off by undoing our, and you're gonna get some water also coming through where those holes are for the bolt. Assuming, yep, that's how, and I'll show you the way to put this together so you will not get any water coming out once we've done this correctly. So here's our hardware from underneath. We're going to do the same thing for the other side. Okay. Take your time with this, because you definitely don't want to crack the tank by rushing this. So there we go. Now we can see it better. That's the bolt. You see the head of the bolt is pretty much all destroyed, and we've taken the nut out of the bottom, and here we go. It's coming up. And there's one of them. show you the other one. The other one may be a little bit more challenging to take off. Okay. In my case anyways. Let's see. See, it's all rusted underneath here. That's what we need to take off. And this was our water valve. And this is the line that comes in. This is what I was talking about. This is, you just hand tighten this right there. And this was our water supply line that we have taken off. So I'm going to pause the video and take this off. This would be the last thing. I guess I need to put my gloves on. My fingers are getting black there. So this is the last thing we need to take off. So I may spray some WD-40 here to get rid of some of that rust. All right. So here we are. We have the hacksaw blade on the bolt, and we're engaged, and we are sawing through this bolt. Again, take your time, be careful. You don't want to crack the tank here. Yeah, this is basically like escaping out of Alcatraz. It's going to take a while. So we'll come back to this once we get this cut. We used the hacksaw to take the second bolt off, and the tank is loose right now. Before taking the tank off, I wanted to show you what's inside of these Fluidmaster 2-inch flush valve, the repair kit actually. So this is the actual flush valve. And then this is the seal that goes underneath. We'll see it when we take that one apart. This is the nut that will secure our flush valve to our tank. And you notice there's a seal here, and this is the seal that stays inside the tank. And this is the one that, again, after being in there for a few years, once you touch it, you're gonna have black fingers. So then that's that, and then we have this little contraption over here that goes on the top over here that allows for the line here. So they have a clip on this one. I like the clips actually better than this, so I may leave the clip on here. So that's what this is, basically to secure our line that's coming off of our fill valve to our flush valve. Because as you notice, there is water that comes out that goes in the center, and this is the water that goes into the tank after you flush. This water comes from here, this hose, and goes into the center, which goes into our tank. So the other thing that we have in this kit is the 2 brand new bolts that we need to have, and a handful of washers and nuts. And in the washer category, we have our stainless steel washer, our rubber washers, and I'll show you how to put this thing together so we don't have to experience this again where we have rusted bolts on the outside of the tank, because there shouldn't be any. So anyway, so this one they give you, let's see how many they give us here. They give us 4 of these washers, and looks like 6 of those, and nuts. Just lost one. Okay, all right. Okay, we'll stop right there. So I want to get rid of this for right now. Get it out of the way. We're gonna put a new one on anyway, so I'm just gonna. Be nice to have a little trash can there as well. So I'll put a towel over here because we're gonna still have a little bit of water in here. Next thing I want to do is, since here we go, more nuts. All right, since we're gonna get, we're gonna start touching that old flush valve, the seal on it. I'm gonna put these gloves on, which is pretty easy from here on out because the tough part is done. You would think putting gloves on is the tough part, but no, not really. The tough part is taking those bolts off. After that Bolts have been in place for so many years. Alright, we're going to take this right off of there. There we go. I got a little bit of water in there. What I may do is I may take a little bucket with my paper towel in there. And the water that's in here, dump that in there. Minimize it as much as we can. Okay. Put this back down in here. Take my bucket out of the way. And do it again. So this time we're going to get some water. And all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah, I put the other bolt back in there just in case if I was sawing, shaking this back and forth, didn't want it to fall off. Okay, so first thing first, this is where let me make sure the video is actually catching this. This is where your channel locks come into play. Oh yeah, we're catching it, okay. So we're gonna put this one's a little bit too small. No, that's right. Here we go. Alright. Yeah, this one's a little bit too small. I'm gonna have to get the bigger one here. Now we got it. Okay. So once we put the channel locks on this bad boy. So what we may have to do is quickly, we'll take this off. So this is the nut that I was showing you earlier that holds the entire flush valve in play. So get rid of that and flip it over. There you go, bolt falling out. That was our bolt right there. There's our nasty flush valve. This is what I'm talking about right here. So this has been in here again, I don't know, 15, 16 plus years. I'm going to get rid of this bad boy. And I've got to be careful with this tank. While we have it apart, we're going to go ahead and give it a little cleaning with my last 2 pieces of toilet paper. Since I got rid of that, oh, the other thing I'm going to get rid of, I don't know if you can see it or not, is this seal here. Right there, that's another nasty one right there. This was our bolt that we cut right there. You see that? Alright. That's out of there. So again, while we got it apart, we're going to go ahead and give it a little cleaning. And at this point, I want to take this one off since I used it for demo. Get rid of that one. And let me get some cleaner. The good old-fashioned Windex will do the trick for us. Clean this guy. So next is we're gonna go ahead and put our new flush valve in. So notice the old one that came out, it was actually sitting in this orientation, like this, which I don't like because again, it blocks this bolt here. In this case, it didn't matter because I couldn't use the head of the bolt to get the bolt out, but what I like to do is put it in an orientation that the bolts are exposed, right? So here we go, that one right here, like that. And we're going to keep it like that. We'll flip this guy over. So the next thing going on here is the nut that we have with it. As long as you don't drop it. So the nut goes on here like that. You can see it there. I'm assuming you can see it. Let me check the video. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. Okay. So there's the nut. We'll tighten it up by hand as much as we can. Then I'll flip it over again. Take a look at my position of the valve. Looks good. I'm clearing the bolt holes, which is nice. And the other thing I like is that this, the flush valve, the riser on it over here, it's pretty high, so we're up to here. I say I like it, but I want to see now if this guy here, because we got to be mindful of, we're going to use this, right? Mindful of this, which is not quite good. Our hose is not going to reach there, right? And then also, we're not going to have enough room. We may, because the lid is concave inside, so we may be able to get away with it. Yeah, because this has got to go from here, right there, and we got to get up to there. And then keep in mind, again, our water level, you can see it, it's right here. And as long as, I think based on the instructions, you have to read it out, it's been a while, but I believe as long as you're about an inch or so above your water level, you're okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off, and first I'm going to mark where my water level is, which is right about here. I'll mark that, and then go even as far as maybe 2 inches above it. So this is right now about 4 inches to here. So I'm going to cut an inch off of here. That way it gives a better positioning for our water line there. Okay, so we're gonna go and flip it over, and I'm gonna pause the video here again. Okie dokie. All right, so this is roughly where our water level is. Again, I'm not gonna even get any close to it. Again, I want to leave about an inch or so above my water level, and even I'll go 2 inches. How's that? So we'll cut it off right about here. So again, this. All right. So we go back to the assembly process again. Same thing as we did before. Here's our preferred orientation right there, right in that position there. Gonna hold it and flip it over, and put that on there, like so. My head's probably in the way. And again, tighten it up as much as you can with the hand before we get into the wrench. Okay, so I like the orientation, I like the right at the position of it. So I'm going to turn it again with my hand as much as I can. And you don't need to go too far with this. Maybe a half a turn or so will do the trick. I'm going to hold the inside of it. If you notice, if it's turning, then you have to put your hand underneath and hold it from the inside. So that's maybe eighth of a turn there. What we're doing, we're collapsing that seal, you know, the one that was nasty off of the other one. We're collapsing that seal to make sure there's no leak from there. Okay, and that should do it. And next, where this guy comes into play, so this goes here, seals there, but we don't put it there, we put it right here. And it actually goes over the hole like that, and goes over the nut, seals all the way down, just like that. Okay, so the next thing we do is we put our bolts together. Now, remember when we took the nuts off on this side, I cut the bolt off, the whole thing came off, right? I don't like that. So the way I like to put these together is in this fashion, all right? I'm going to isolate the tank from the bowl when it comes to these, fastening these bolts. So I'm going to put my rubber washer in here first, and that goes. We still got some old debris sitting here. Get rid of that. That goes in here, like so. Then I put a stainless steel washer and a nut. Notice I didn't put a rubber washer, a stainless steel washer. That's all you need, because the sealing happens inside, not on the outside, right? In this particular case, the sealing happens where the water is inside of it, right? So that's the assembly of it. Again, one more time, we'll take a look at this one. And there's some thin nuts, and there's some thicker ones. The thin ones go here because your gap between your tank and the bowl may be such that the thicker ones may not fit. So here, I'm not sure if you can tell the difference or not. There are two different thickness of nuts. So be careful which one you use. You may get lucky, the thicker one may work, but let's not depend on luck. Let's use what I would suspect the manufacturer recommends the same thing, but if they don't, use the thinner one for underneath, rather attaching the hardware to our tank. So here we go. I'm gonna put this guy on just like that. Again, no metal washer underneath here. So this is gonna compress and seal against the tank. The tank, it's as it may appear to us, it's smooth surface, but yet it's not. So the manufacturing process is such that you have some peaks and valleys on that surface, and by using the plastic, or rather the rubber washer here, that's going to create our seal for us. So here, the same thing again, we're going to put this in here, like that, flip it over like that, put our washer, our thin nut on here, all the way down, like that. All right, so how tight do you have to get this? Tight, but not tight enough that you're going to crack the porcelain. So let's see if the video will capture this. Let's see what's our orientation here right now. Yeah, I think you can see it. Put this bigger one over here for right now. So we're going to take our screwdriver. I'm going to kneel down here so I can get a better position on these. We got to put our screwdriver on top of that screw head and put our wrench here and turn it. And notice that I'm turning the screwdriver, not the wrench, because with the wrench you're going to get a lot more torque, so you may go beyond what's really required and crack the tank. So I'm using my screwdriver. The screwdriver is harder because I don't have a lever arm like I do with the wrench, right? So it's harder to turn. And once I get to a point where the screwdriver doesn't turn anymore, that's good enough. We'll go to the next one. Now, I say that, but if you're super strong, again, be mindful of what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with porcelain, fragile, right there, something like that. Okay. So once we've done that, then the next step is we've already put our seal in. So we'll turn this around. See, now this, as it stands by itself, will hold water for us, right? Because it's not dependent on it being secured down to the bowl. All right, so we'll line this guy up like so. Put that on like that. Okay. So here I'm going to use a one of the rubber washers underneath. So here we're under the tank now, right? Under the tank and under the bowl itself. So then with that rubber washer, next thing I put in a stainless steel washer and one of the thicker ones, thicker nuts. And I don't like to use these either, but that's what they come with this kit. I usually like to use wing nuts. That way you don't tighten it too much. But anyway, we don't have the luxury of that today. So here we go. Just get it started, leave it on there, and then we go with this one. This side, same thing. Our rubber washer goes in first. Let me see if the video is actually catching that. We have to be mindful of how we tighten these down. What I mean by that is that you want to do them just like when you change a tire in a car, right? You don't tighten one bolt down and then go put it on another one and so on and so forth. You don't do that. What you want to do is you want to tighten them up one at a time. Be mindful how your tank is behaving, right? Meaning that it's not tilted in one way, one direction or another. I just hand tighten these. Turn a few turns on one side, go back to the other side. Just keep switching back and forth. And those nuts underneath now, they're not sealing any water, so keep that in mind. So we don't have to make them too tight. All they're doing is holding our tank in place, right? That's all it's doing. So again, I'm just putting pressure down and turn one, go back to the other one. Turn one, go back to the other one. There you go. Couple turns each. Again, we may be just good enough with hand tightening these. That's why I like wing nuts. There you go. Okay, so that's that, and connect our water line underneath. Again, this is hand tightened. Yeah, hand tighten that one too. And okay, so we cleaned up a little bit, and the next thing we want to do is we want to change our flapper. Again, I like these non-adjustable Kurki brand flappers that work really well. Before I do that, regarding the two tank bolts, again, I like to use wing nuts underneath so I don't tighten them down too much. Some people like to use a wrench. If you are not comfortable enough and you don't think you can get enough of force when you're tightening those nuts, then feel free to use a wrench underneath. But again, be very careful so you don't over tighten, because you will crack the tank. And the other thing I was going to show you is based on the instructions, looks like they're suggesting the same way that we just did this as far as the tank bolts are concerned. So they have the bolt head, they're showing it inside of the tank, which we did, and then we have our rubber washer underneath it, and then we have the tank. Underneath that we have our metal washer and the small nut, then the bowl, then another rubber washer, metal washer, and the nut. And the same again, they don't recommend tightening these too much. And let's see here, reinforce, well, yeah, and then also they make reference to if you have 3 bolts in the tank, which I've seen. If you do, then you have to buy another set of bolts, washers, and nuts. And then last but not least, let me point this out too. As I cut the pipe to our, what they call the overflow pipe to our flush valve, the thing to notice here, they mentioned that Fluid Master recommends 1/2 inch. So they recommend to have the water to sit below the pipe 1/2 inch. Again, we did it longer than that, which is not a problem. It's actually better in my opinion. So, as long as you keep in mind that your overflow is below the next exposed place where the water is going to come out, which would be this handle here. You don't want the water to come up to this handle. So as long as our overflow is below it, which means that if the tank gets filled up, the valve doesn't shut off, the fill valve doesn't shut off, the water comes up to here, then it's going to go down to the overflow, which goes into the toilet, versus coming and overflowing the top of the tank, or in this case, the next place would be the hole that our handle is in. So, which, anyway. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to replace the fill valve there, or rather the flapper. Okay, stand by. So my head may be in the way here as we do this, but bear with me. We're just gonna pop this one off. Again, some people like these adjustable ones. I don't, because there's another element that you have to deal with, adjusting it and so on and so forth. And did you get the adjustment right? No, I didn't. So then there's not enough water going through it. It doesn't flush all the way, so on and so forth. But these are old school, basic flappers that they just pop right into here. And on this side the same way, pop it in there. And then adjusting the chain. So you want to make sure when you're adjusting this chain, which in most cases you have to move your clip down few lengths into the chain. So you want it to be not too tight. If it's too tight, then the flapper doesn't rest and you're going to have water flowing, ghost flushing, so on and so forth. And you don't want it to be too loose, because if it is too loose, if the flapper opens up, if you got too much chain, the chain may get caught underneath the flapper. So again, it's a fine adjustment. And one thing I would recommend, it takes a couple times to do it, but one thing I would recommend is once you feel that you have it adjusted correctly, put the lid on and then flush to make sure that you're pulling the chain all the way up without the lever hitting the lid. So in this particular case right now, this lever, the arm, comes above our top of the tank, so it's going to hit this. So if you adjust it for this, which means that the full length of this chain would be used, the lever will never come up this high because you're going to hit the lid first. Then again, you'll figure this out as you flush it a few times. Last but not least, what I do is to make sure I don't have any leaks, or at least I should say to detect if I have any leaks. Take some toilet paper, lay it down where the bolts are on both sides, and just leave it there for a day or two. And if it gets wet, even a little droplet, that toilet paper will be a good indicator. I forgot to tell you that a couple other tools that we used in this project, since the bolts were rusted, WD-40 and our handy dandy Hacksaw. So if you don't have one of these one-sided, one-handle, open hacksaws, then you can use just the blade by itself. All right, so I think that's it. Thank you for watching. I think we've done it. And again, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like what you see on this channel, subscribe to it. And that's all, folks.